Go.
Good morning, welcome to the fort and to the blacksmith shop. My name is Danny and I am the blacksmith here at Fort Langley at the National Historic Site. And the blacksmiths here will wait till the train passes. It's the only thing that makes more noise than the blacksmith. So yeah. The blacksmiths at Hudson's Bay Company were not great workers of steel. So most of the things that they're making are farm tools types of things that would have been like shovels and hay forks and various types of things, fixing plowshares, an enormous amount of just general maintenance work around the fort. But they were required to make two-edged weapons, axes, trade axes like this. Which knocked on and off the handle, about 3 sizes. This is the mid-size, and when I get my fire going, as soon as we finish making that knife, this is what I'm making. I'm making about half a dozen axes. They also had to make beaver traps like this one here. This one was broken, brought to me by a friend. He pulled it out of a stream in Abbotsford. I suspect it's not super old, probably 40, 50 years old, maybe from mid-century last time, but same design as the beaver traps. And it was the springs of those that gave the blacksmiths the hugest part, because it's steel. So they didn't have a lot of steel options, and they were never required to make knives for trade because they just weren't good enough. So all of their steel, all of their knives were coming from Sheffield, as well as their files. So even though they're trade knives, they were actually quite good because Sheffield was kind of the center of the universe for steel at the time. But blacksmiths have always made their own tools, and that's responsibility for making your own. And one of the things that I make a lot, probably about every 6 months, and I can see my good blacksmith's knife has disappeared. Either that or someone has taken this one, oh, this may have been it, and tried to sharpen themselves on the whetstone, and it's got a little bit of a bad grind on it at the moment, but I can put another grind on it, and that's the tool that I use to put the grind on all the knives. This is a blacksmith's knife here, sometimes called a Viking knife, and I always say it's the kind of knife made when a blacksmith comes into their workshop and goes, where'd my knife go? Someone comes in, because if you're the blacksmith, someone comes and takes your tools.
That's right.
So this is what I'm making this morning as soon as the fire gets going. And this one actually is made from this old file. So this was a prime source of steel for Hudson's Bay Company blacksmiths. And this file was brought to me by a friend this spring. It has been in the mud in Stave Lake, across the river here, for probably close to a century. And it is useless as a file, but it is still magnificent steel. And from it I make edged tools myself, blacksmith's knives, But the first tool and the primary tool that they made from it were steels. And that's what I'm doing right now. So I've got a steel here. And these steels are made, well, most of these are made from that same file there. This one, I think that one's made from that file. So we'll use this one. And a piece of flint. So to light the fire, you strike against the piece of flint and it makes a spark. I'm about to light my fire here right now as well. It's a really reliable way. It doesn't have to be this shape, doesn't even have to be a piece of flint, just a hard rock, good piece of steel. So that's the first part of it. Next part is I need some tinder to light the fire. And at this time of year, I noticed a switch probably about a week and a half ago. And I'm sure, although it's probably just my imagination, but I always have to switch the kind of tinder I'm using depending on the season. At spring and fall, almost inevitably, I start switching. I probably don't actually have to switch in the spring because this would still work in the spring during the summertime. But for some reason, the heavier twine that I use in the summertime just does not work in the wintertime. So I'm using all of these pieces together to light this fire. It could be anything. We've had rain fairly recently, so the grass isn't dry enough at the moment, but you could be dry leaves or moss or grasses or ferns, kind of anything that's in your environment that you can use to light the fire.
There's been no trouble for fires to start in this province.
No trouble for fires to start. The nice thing about this kind of flint and steel, it's not like the modern ferrocerium, and I've got a magnesium ferrocerium rod. The spark on this is really, really quite cold. And but the piece that makes this really reliable is not the tinder, it's the charcoal that you use to catch the spark.
Yes.
So we're using char cloth, same thing. So this is what's going to burn in my fire here, this material, but I'm going to catch the spark from that using a piece of charcoal made from old cloth. And it's quite straightforward to make, and I make it all the time. Probably have to do that again soon. So this is just a regular tin. In the 19th century and earlier, well, not super earlier, but tin was just everywhere. It was ubiquitous. It's kind of the 19th century's version of cardboard and plastic to cover things. But you get an old tin, punch a hole in it, and put in your cotton and linen rags. And it cooks on the fire for about 20 minutes while it's smoking. And then when it's done, it turns to this. It's just charcoal. The clothing has been turned to charcoal. And I kind of like pieces that are in the middle. It can get kind of crispy, which means it gets, I think it's probably just a creosote on the edge of it. Pulls apart really easily. Very, very easy to make. You make it on your barbecue or whatever if you want to.
Use old denim for it these days.
Yeah. Well, I used to use jeans a lot, and then they made them comfortable with spandex, and now it's a bit of a death knell.
Yeah.
So I'll just finish pulling this apart, and altogether, this makes a process very easy to light the fire. What you might be most surprised to know is who had a flint and steel in the 19th century, because this gift of flint and steel was very common to give your children when they turned 5 years old. 5. So there's some speculation about why it would be 5, but it's probably kind of a rite of passage for a couple of reasons. Someone a little bit more morbid than the others. 5 years old, if you made it to 5, you had beaten the odds. Infant mortality around the world was high at that time. But more than likely, it's 5-year-old was probably thought that you're old enough to be left alone in the house when your parents are out working.
That's right.
So if all of your heating's by fire and lighting's by fire and cooking's by fire, who better to light your fires than the responsible 5-year-old? So now all of this goes together to light the fire. It's very simple. I pile the char cloth on top, get myself a piece of flint. I just find one with a little bit of a sharper edge. You can nap these, which is very carefully take an edge off with a variety of different tools. I'm not terribly good at napping. I usually just bash it with a hammer, but that should give me enough of a spark. And there you can see it's caught right away.
Right away, yep.
So, and that more depends on the char cloth than anyone else. So you can see that there. You see that? So it's not like a match. So if it's a windy day and you have a match, that's out. Char cloth doesn't go out. It's hard to put out. You have to work at it. I could pinch it out with my fingers. I could put it in a tinder box like this where I'd carry everything and close the lid and that would starve it of oxygen. Or I could douse it with water. But nor do you see, it's not burning fast either. It just burns very slow because it's carbon. It's the same thing I'm using in my fire. Charcoal here, but I'm using charcoal made from coal. So that's what's going to do. So I'm going to take this bundle. I'm going to give it the thing that it needs in order to light, and that's just a little bit of oxygen.
Whoa.
So fires light very, very easily in the 19th century, and everybody had them. And the Hudson's Bay Company blacksmiths made those by the thousands from old files exactly the same way, keeping the trade files because they were a great source of steel. So now I'm just blowing on the fire itself. It's kind of hard to see. If you move around this side, you might be able to see it a little bit better. And I'm just lighting some wood chips and things that I've got going here. This is not the material that I'm going to use to forge with. It's just what I'm using to light the fire. And once it gets going sufficiently, I'm going to smother it. I'm going to cover it over with coke. That's the fuel that has burnt yesterday. And it burns in the fire. That's really the stuff that I need. So I'll cover over the first layer with coke, and then I'll cover over the second layer with coal, and then it's going to smoke like the dickens for about 25, 30 minutes. And then it will be ready for me to do some forging. So I don't have to worry about smothering this fire because the air for it is coming from the great bellows. Pumped from the bottom half to the top, down that pipe, around the back, and up to a hole underneath the forge there. And that's what gives me the air, so I never have to worry about it going out. So now I'm putting on some coal. And now I will spend 10 or 15 minutes regretting not having the blacksmith's best tool, which would be an 8-year-old, to have had the fire lit for me by the time I get in.
So you have one here too.
Yeah, I know, it would be perfect. You hardly get dirty at all. So this is really common for